Silence punishes louder than words ever could. There comes a moment when you stop explaining yourself, not because you've run out of words, but because you've finally understood who deserves them. You reach that quiet threshold where peace is worth more than justification, where you'd rather be misunderstood than drained. That's when silence stops being passive and becomes power. This is about that shift, that invisible turning point when the mind stops begging to be understood and starts mastering its own narrative. When you stop performing emotional CPR on relationships that died long ago. When you finally realize that peace doesn't come with closure, it comes when you stop chasing it. For the longest time, you believed your explanations could fix everything. That if you just phrased it right, stayed calm, gave one more chance, they'd finally get it. But they never did, because they weren't listening to understand. They were listening to maintain control. Your words were the fuel keeping their illusion alive. Silence at first feels wrong. It feels like surrender, but it's not. It's the art of withdrawal, the discipline of conserving energy instead of convincing. It's the awareness that your reaction is the oxygen to someone else's chaos. And once you cut that supply, their entire system begins to collapse. That's the beauty of Stoicism. It teaches that power isn't about domination, it's about restraint, about mastering the space between stimulus and response, about realizing that silence isn't weakness, it's discernment. Every time you choose not to explain yourself, you're telling the world, my peace is not up for negotiation. And you'll see it happen, the reversal. The moment they stop feeling superior and start feeling the emptiness you left behind. The sound of your absence echoes louder than your presence ever did. The same people who once mocked your calm will begin to crave it, because nothing unsettles the manipulative more than someone they can no longer provoke. The punishment of silence isn't vengeance, it's consequence. You don't want them to hurt, it's just that in your absence they finally meet themselves. And in that quiet reflection, without your attention to anchor them, they confront what they've always run from, the emptiness within. That's what Stoic silence does. It restores balance without confrontation. It teaches through absence. It transforms your stillness into a mirror where others see their own chaos. You no longer need to defend, clarify, or prove. You let time and truth do the speaking, and they always do. Here's the paradox. While the world sees your silence as cold, you know it's the warmest form of clarity. It's the peace of someone who no longer trades energy for validation. The quiet power of someone who's learned that not every connection deserves closure, and not every battle deserves a response. So if this message finds you in that silent phase, tired of being misunderstood, tired of defending your calm, remember this. Silence isn't the end of communication. It's the beginning of self-respect. And before we go deeper into this journey of Stoic control, take a second to do something meaningful. If this message grounds you, if it reminds you that your calm has value, consider supporting this channel through the Super Thanks button below, not as charity, but as a gesture of alignment, a recognition that what we are building here is a space for inner strength, quiet power, and emotional mastery. Every show of support helps this message reach those still fighting battles they should have already walked away from. You're not giving, you're investing in silence as strength. Now, let's begin. Because silence begins to punish. When you stop explaining yourself, there comes a point when something inside finally gives up. Words lose their meaning, fading into static. The need to be understood turns into exhaustion. You've explained, justified, repeated the same story, hoping they'd finally see what was always obvious to you. But they never did. Not because they couldn't, because they didn't want to. And that changes everything. You begin to see that every explanation is a subtle plea for validation. You say, you didn't understand me, but what truly hurts is realizing they never cared to. The idea of strategic silence hasn't reached you yet. All you know is noise, effort, and the constant need to make sense. And each attempt drains another drop of your energy. Your emotional control begins to erode. Your heart races every time a vague message arrives, and you rush to explain yourself, afraid to lose something that's already gone. Yet somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice begins to whisper. The Stoic voice, soft but unshakable. It reminds you that true psychological power doesn't come from convincing anyone. It comes from letting go. The balance shifts the moment you stop explaining, because whoever feels the need to justify themselves has already surrendered power. The other person watches you struggle for clarity, for resolution, for harmony, and that effort feeds their ego. But one day the exhaustion outweighs the need to be right. That's when detachment begins. And detachment doesn't arrive with rage. It comes cloaked in stillness, a dense, unfamiliar calm, not the kind that frightens you, but the kind that finally frees you. You start to see absence as strength. You stop talking, stop writing, stop explaining. You just breathe. You observe. And in that quiet space, you start to rebuild the shape you lost trying to be understood. The so-called punishment of silence isn't revenge. It's a natural correction of imbalance. It's the echo that follows when someone stops chasing what was never meant to be controlled. The Stoic mind doesn't crave emotional justice. It seeks peace. And peace cannot be negotiated. While they wait for a reaction, you decide not to give one. Not out of pride, but out of respect for your own inner calm. You discover that true strength isn't in speaking. It's in staying silent without collapsing inside. The world won't understand. They'll call you cold, distant, detached. But you know what you're doing. What you hold back today will protect you tomorrow. That emotional discipline that once felt impossible slowly becomes your power. You no longer need to prove you were right. You no longer need to prove anything. You simply let the echo of your absence speak for you. And that echo grows louder than any words you could have said. Your self-control becomes a new language. It's no longer about being understood. It's about understanding yourself. You no longer speak from fear, you speak with purpose. And when there's no purpose, you simply don't respond. Silence stops being absence. It becomes authority. That magnetic presence born from not reacting begins to alter everything. The other person senses the distance. They grow uneasy. They wonder if you've done something, but you haven't. You've simply stopped doing, and that's the paradox. Your inaction becomes their reflection. Those who once shattered your voice now face the echo of their own noise. The narcissistic reactions arrive. Messages disguised as care, manipulative gestures, subtle provocations. But your mind no longer enters the arena. You've learned the essence of quiet revenge. Not to destroy, but to let time reveal the truth. What once felt like weakness now feels like self-respect. You're astonished to realize you don't need to win arguments to feel powerful. You just needed silence, firm, deliberate silence that no longer begs to be heard. And as you hold that silence, transformation begins. Not in them, in you. You discover there's nothing stronger than a mind that uses silence as both weapon and shield. True resilience isn't enduring pain. It's refusing to repeat what no longer makes sense. Day by day, your balance returns. Thoughts settle. Breathing slows. Your body stops reacting. You can feel the ego collapsing. And within that collapse, you find peace. Control quietly returns to its rightful owner, you. You no longer try to explain yourself. Instead, you wonder why you ever felt the need to. And that question marks the beginning of mastery. Real mastery isn't power over others. It's power over your own urge to justify. The power of silence begins to take form. It's not something you enforce. It's something that radiates. You realize every person who refused to listen was a teacher. Every failed conversation a lesson in self-awareness. Every rejection a form of training. What once felt like punishment now feels like rebirth. The bitterness fades, leaving only clarity. And the moment you stop explaining yourself, the world begins speaking back to you in the language you once feared. Silence. That's where the real work of silence begins. Not outward, but inward. It was never love. It was habit disguised as understanding. You thought that if you reasoned calmly, they'd reflect, they'd wake up. What you didn't see was that they weren't seeking understanding. They were seeking control. Your voice was their remote. Your reactions, their power source. Strategic silence begins when you finally grasp that some people don't want solutions. They want to see you lose composure. Every explanation you offer is an open door into your mind. That's how you hand over your psychological power, quietly, unknowingly. Stoicism isn't about not feeling. It's about refusing to become a mirror of someone else's chaos. They provoke to measure your limits, to confirm that you're still emotionally available. And while you try to clarify, you fall into the oldest power trap of all, the one where whoever reacts obeys. Watch closely. Every time you justify yourself to someone who doesn't listen, your energy sinks. You shrink. Doubt creeps in. Meanwhile, they relax, not because they're right, but because they've regained control. That's the trick. Emotional control isn't lost by yelling. It's lost by explaining to someone who has already chosen not to care. When silence arrives, it isn't punishment, it's revelation. You finally see that you were fighting alone, trapped in a monologue. And you realize something far greater than winning an argument, protecting your peace. That's where detachment truly begins. Detachment isn't about not feeling, it's about no longer insisting. It's that subtle shift that happens when you rise above and see every effort to explain for what it was. A desperate attempt to fix something already broken. They never wanted understanding. They wanted dominance. And once that truth lands, everything changes. Absence becomes a mirror. You stop speaking, and they're left face to face with their own emptiness. No more justifications to feed on, no explanations to twist. Only silence, and in that silence the truth emerges. Who needed whom? The so-called silent punishment begins as unease in them. That discomfort is proof that your energy is no longer accessible. The one who once ruled you through noise now panics in your calm. Because the Stoic mind doesn't shout, it observes. You start practicing inner stillness like a shield. You don't react, you don't explain, you don't justify. You simply breathe. And in that sacred space between stimulus and response, real mental strength is born. The kind that teaches you closure doesn't need the last word. Your emotional discipline is forged in silence. Every impulse you master, every word you choose not to say, becomes part of your armor. And when you can hold that silence without fear, no manipulation can reach you. Self-control turns into power. That's when you stop explaining and start watching them drown in their own noise. That magnetic stillness can't be imitated. It's born from balance. Then come the narcissistic reactions. They call you cold, accuse you of indifference, poke at you to regain control. But you already know. It was never love they wanted. It was power. And when they can't extract it from you anymore, they're left alone with the weight of their own emptiness. What once was anxiety now becomes silent revenge. Not the kind that seeks to wound, but the kind that lets reality hand each person their reflection. And the manipulator's reflection is void. You feel self-respect rising quietly inside you. You realize that strength doesn't come from proving your worth. It comes from serenity. Every word you choose not to speak becomes another brick in your transformation. That transformation isn't loud. It's invisible on the outside, but undeniable within. You stop caring who understands you and start caring who brings you peace. Mental balance becomes your priority, not your prize. The collapse of the ego arrives quietly, without noise or spectacle. You stop reacting because you finally see the truth. Conflict only exists while you feed it. Without your response, it starves. You begin observing yourself from a distance with a clarity you never had before. You recognize that every battle you fought was just an attempt to escape loneliness. But solitude stops hurting once you understand it isn't emptiness, it's space. And that space, it fills with self-mastery. You stop speaking to convince and start speaking to express. You stop explaining and start understanding. And that shift changes everything. Because once you learn to control the urge to explain, the power of silence becomes your sharpest response. While others fill the air to hide their void, you rebuild yourself inside it. Resilience isn't resisting others, it's resisting the impulse to lose yourself in them. And that's where real growth begins, the kind only silence can bring. And when that realization settles, something deeper begins to surface. There comes a day when you simply stop justifying yourself. You don't announce it, you don't plan it, it just happens. You realize that words change nothing, that your voice gets lost in selective ears. So you choose silence, not from pride, but from survival. Silence rarely arrives all at once. It creeps in slowly, almost awkwardly. At first it feels foreign, like standing in a room filled with words you refuse to speak. Thoughts echo, explanations get trapped in your throat. But soon, you understand. This silence isn't emptiness, it's a boundary. The invisible line between what you gave and what you now reclaim as psychological power. When you choose quiet, the dynamic shifts. The one used to being chased now grows uneasy. They study your stillness, waiting for a sign, a reaction, a message. But nothing comes, and the absence begins to weigh heavier than any words you could have said. Strategic silence isn't distance, it's dominance. It's the art of watching without engaging, of listening without responding. It's the understanding that not every emotional war deserves your presence. Some battles are won simply by walking away at the right moment. Your stoic mind starts to operate on a new level. You no longer react from the wound, you act from clarity. You don't suppress anger, you refine it into calm. And while they try to provoke chaos, you choose peace. That's the first true layer of emotional control, refusing to let someone else's noise decide your state. You start to notice how psychological power quietly shifts. Once, they dictated the tempo. Now, you do. Not because you say more, but because you say nothing. Your silence breaks the pattern. Your detachment speaks. Your absence becomes a language of its own. Silent punishment doesn't require design. It unfolds naturally. The moment a manipulator senses they've lost control, panic sets in. They wait for your reaction to confirm their importance, but all they meet is emptiness. And that emptiness, though wordless, screams louder than anything you could say. You no longer belong to their control. Your mental strength grows with every minute of stillness. You learn that calm itself is victory. You realize that real self-respect begins the moment you choose not to respond, even when you could. The silence that once hurt now shields you. Emotional discipline becomes your new presence. You stop trying to win arguments. You simply refuse to lose yourself in them. You no longer care to be right. You care to remain balanced. That's the difference between a wounded mind and a trained one. Self-control stops being effort. It becomes instinct. You've learned to observe impulses without being ruled by them. You see the message, the jab, the provocation, and you simply don't enter. Not because you don't feel, but because you understand the price of reaction. Every word withheld is energy reclaimed. From that stillness, a magnetic presence emerges. Something sensed, not spoken. Your silence draws more attention than your voice ever did. They start wondering, imagining, doubting. Are you gone? Are you punishing them? The truth is simpler. You're finally at peace. Soon, the narcissistic reactions arrive. They test, they prod, they try to pull you back into the game. But there is no game anymore. Only a stoic mind, elevated, watching their ego dismantle itself in the face of silence. That is the essence of quiet revenge. No response, no clarification, no justification. You let time deliver the message you no longer need to. Silence doesn't seek to hurt. It restores order. And when it does, what you feel isn't triumph. It's freedom. Self-respect becomes law. You no longer argue with those who refuse to hear, nor chase those who show indifference. You become someone who knows when to walk away, and in that departure lies wisdom, not weakness. Transformation begins to show in your body. You sleep deeper, your thoughts clear. You stop replaying every conversation. The balance you once chased no longer depends on controlling others. It's born from mastering yourself. The ego collapses, but not yours. Theirs. Silence turns into a mirror they can't escape. For the first time, they see themselves without the applause of your attention, and that reflection cuts deeper than any words could. Through that quiet observation, truth dawns. You never needed to be understood. You needed to understand yourself. That realization becomes the seed of mastery. Power isn't control over others. It's command over your own need to be seen. The power of silence begins to sculpt you. It's no longer just a tactic, it's a way of being. Your resilience expands, your energy purifies, your inner growth becomes visible, even in your stillness. Because when you choose silence, you don't lose your voice, you reclaim your power. That simple choice changes everything. And right there in that new calm, something deeper begins to unfold. There's no speech, no announcement, just an invisible shift. You stop replying. You don't block, accuse, or explain. You simply disappear from the noise. What once felt like anxiety now feels like direction. Your silence is no longer defense, it's strategy. At first it's difficult. You glance at the phone. You check for messages. The mind invents excuses to break the calm, but you learn to hold the line. Every minute without reaction becomes training. Every day without response sharpens your psychological edge. Strategic silence isn't absence. It's presence without participation. You're still there, but no longer available for manipulation. You're present only where purpose exists. You speak when there's meaning, not when there's impulse. And that's when the effect begins. The one who once measured your worth by your reactions starts losing control. The power dynamic reverses silently. They cast bait, send subtle jabs, provoke, but you don't flinch. Your stoic mind holds steady, unmoved. Silence becomes a mirror again. It reflects everything they once projected onto you. Your detachment exposes their emptiness. Your absence exposes their dependence. Your calm exposes their chaos. And while they scramble to decode your coldness, you realize you no longer need to decode anything at all. That's the paradox of silence. While they chase attention, you gain clarity. The silent punishment doesn't require a plan. It happens by nature. Because when you stop feeding someone's ego, it collapses. Silence doesn't destroy, it reveals. Emotional control becomes your armor. You stop reacting, you observe, you stop explaining, you understand. You turn into a quiet strategist, no longer chasing, only analyzing. And through that analysis, you finally see what was hidden all along. The one who made you doubt yourself was terrified of your mental strength. Emotional discipline reveals itself in the smallest moments, in not opening the chat, not checking their story, not replying even when you want to. Those seconds of restraint are worth more than 1,000 arguments. Every silence you hold becomes a declaration of power. Self-control isn't indifference, it's sovereignty. You learn that silence isn't always punishment, sometimes it's healing. Your magnetic presence intensifies precisely because you're no longer trying. You don't persuade, chase, or justify. You simply exist, calm and untouchable. And that calm unsettles them most. The one who fed off your reactions now feels your absence as punishment. Silence achieves what words never could. It restores order. The narcissistic reactions multiply. Desperation takes form. Messages, half-hearted apologies, sarcasm, manipulative quiet spells. But you don't step into that dance anymore. You've learned the truth. Real psychological power isn't control over others. It's mastery over your own impulses. Silent revenge isn't about payback. It's about internal justice. You let time deliver what your words no longer need to. Those who once played with your voice now suffocate in your silence. Without meaning to, you become their lesson. Self-respect blooms in the quiet. People begin treating you differently, not because of what you say, but because of what you radiate. Your mental balance unsettles those who only know how to connect through chaos. The ego collapses, but again, not yours, theirs. They can't handle the loss of control over your emotions. Their hunger for attention becomes visible, while you find freedom in no longer responding to anyone's noise. Introspection becomes second nature. You observe your thoughts without judgment. You feel how silence protects you, how your resilience strengthens every time you resist temptation. You realize you don't need noise to move forward. Inner growth doesn't come with applause. There are no witnesses, only the quiet certainty that you chose the harder road, the one that leads to real strength. You no longer need to prove anything because you finally understand everything. While the world outside rushes and trembles, you remain still, calm, in control, silent, until something unexpected begins to happen. When silence endures, the tests begin. It doesn't take long for them to try to provoke you again. A meaningless message, a story designed to bait you, a calculated silence meant to make you break yours. Every move is part of the game, but you're no longer playing. Strategic silence demands more than calm, it demands endurance. It's easy to stay quiet for an hour. The real test is staying quiet when your pride screams for a reply. Your mind begins to tremble. Your ego whispers, say something, defend yourself, don't let them win. But something deeper intervenes. That stoic voice reminds you, true psychological power isn't in what you say, It's in what you refuse to say. Now the power dynamic has fully reversed. They once decided when to appear and when to vanish. Now you decide. Every day that passes without a response weakens their grip. They feel it, even if they'll never admit it. For the first time, their calm begins to crack. Your emotional control is tested again. The provocations come disguised as apologies, the flattery wrapped in manipulation. But you see the pattern. You've studied the psychology of reaction. They don't want conversation. They want confirmation that you still care. Detachment isn't coldness, it's wisdom. You understand that every ignored message is a quiet victory. Every word unsaid pulls you farther from the chaos that once consumed you. Your absence hurts, not because it punishes, but because it reveals the truth. Access to you no longer exists. That's when the silent punishment truly begins. No insults, no explanations, just the void. A void they created, now echoing back at them. They try to fill it, with distractions, new faces, borrowed stories. But the echo of your calm cuts through every noise. Your stoic mind observes from above. There's nothing left to prove. You let time act in your favor. Every provocation you resist adds a layer of strength. Every reaction you deny becomes another wall of discipline. Yes, it hurts sometimes. Holding silence when your heart aches to speak is a war in itself. But in that internal war, you discover who truly commands, your reason or your impulse. And the moment you choose reason, power quietly returns to its rightful owner, you. Your self-control becomes your shield. It's no longer about pride. It's about peace. You don't play their game. You don't try to close the circle that no longer exists. Because now you understand, some doors aren't closed with words. They're closed with silence. Your magnetic presence intensifies. The longer you stay quiet, the more power you radiate. They begin to feel like they're losing everything without knowing why. And you realize you never lost anything at all. You simply reclaimed what was always yours, your energy. The narcissistic reactions begin to shift. Contempt fades into nostalgia. Sarcasm softens into pleading. Yet you remain still. You understand this swing for what it is, the ego's final attempt to survive. Your steady silence dismantles it, piece by piece. Silent revenge unfolds by itself. You don't wish to make them suffer, but they do. Not because you inflict pain, but because your calm forces them to face their own chaos. They realize there's no one left to play the game with. Self-respect hardens into something unshakable. Each mastered impulse deepens your transformation. You no longer recognize the version of yourself who needed to be understood to feel worthy. Now your worth is born from inner balance. The ego collapses, and with it, the illusion of control. You finally see that silence doesn't punish others. It frees you. It becomes a tool of mastery. Every provocation you overcome is another lesson in the power of silence, another layer of resilience, another sign of evolution. The tests don't end easily. Sometimes they return wearing tenderness, nostalgia, or promises. But you no longer respond the same. You've learned to hear beneath the words, to sense intention beneath sound. Then something new begins. Calm stops being effort, it becomes nature. Silence stops being strategy, it becomes identity. You've passed the tests, you've crossed the threshold. But what follows isn't easier. At first, they mistook your silence for weakness. They smiled with arrogance, certain you'd come back to explain, to justify, to try again. But you didn't. And that was when the game ended. Because once you stop speaking, everything you withhold begins to speak for you. Days pass and what was once routine becomes absence. Their mind fills the void with questions. What happened? Why no insistence? Why no reaction? Confusion turns to anxiety. The silence they once ignored now haunts them. Every word you never said becomes a mirror, forcing them to face their own noise. Your calm unsettles and disarms them. They try to provoke the old version of you, the one who reacted, but that version no longer exists. Your stoic mind has taken the throne. Your emotional control stands as an unbreakable wall. The psychological power has fully reversed. You no longer need to explain, and they no longer know how to hold power without your reaction. It's the quiet collapse of the ego. No explosions, no drama, just the unbearable weight of emptiness. Your detachment shines brighter than ever. There's no anger, no need to prove strength, only clarity. You finally see that the true silent punishment was never about making them suffer. It was about no longer participating in their chaos. That's the purest revenge, the one that doesn't seek it. Silence becomes the judge. Without a word, it puts everything back in its place. Those who underestimated you now remember you. Those who manipulated you now stumble. Those who played with your energy now crave it. And you, still calm, keep walking. Your absence weighs more than any presence you ever offered. With every attempt to reach you, they feel the distance you built with peace. And you no longer look back. You understand that every conversation you didn't have was a door you closed with dignity. The calm you've conquered feels like absolute power, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that no longer needs to. You've broken the cycle. The power dynamic ends where it always should have, with you, in control of yourself. Self-respect becomes silent law. You no longer accept less than you give. You no longer trade peace for attention. You've learned that silence isn't a wall, it's a filter. It allows only what resonates with your frequency. Everything else fades on its own. Your mental balance no longer depends on outcomes. It lives in the process. The ego has fallen, and from its ruins, a free mind rises. You don't need to prove your transformation. Your energy proclaims it without sound. Introspection turns into gratitude. You thank what broke you because it also built you. You thank the moments when no one listened, because that's where self-mastery began. Every silence was a seed, and today it blooms as inner strength. The power of silence is now complete. You no longer seek revenge, you seek evolution. You no longer punish through absence, you inspire through calm. Because those who master the art of non-reaction master life itself. And those who master life no longer fear losing anyone. Resilience becomes the rhythm of your breath. You don't wait for closure, chase answers, or beg for attention. You've learned to be whole within your own silence. And while they struggle to understand what happened, you're no longer watching. You move forward, steady, composed, certain that real growth always happens quietly, far from the noise, far from the chaos. Because when you go silent, you don't lose your voice, you reclaim control. And the moment you stop explaining yourself, the universe begins to explain everything you once couldn't see. That's the point of transformation. When there are no more words, no more battles, no more needs, that's when silence becomes absolute power. The kind of power that doesn't display itself. The kind that's felt. The kind that punishes without ever laying a hand. At the end of every storm there's silence, and it's within that silence that power is reborn. You've walked through noise, through chaos, through the exhausting need to be understood. You've lived the cycle, talk, explain, justify, repeat, until your words lost their weight. But now you know better. You've seen what happens when you stop chasing understanding and start embodying peace. That's when the world shifts. Not because they changed, but because you did. The truth is simple. Silence transforms you long before it ever reaches them. It rewires the mind, teaches patience, and replaces reaction with control. It takes everything they once used against you, your emotion, your care, your need to fix, and turns it into armor. The same calm they mistook for weakness becomes the quietest form of dominance. And if you look closely, you'll see what silence truly does. It doesn't destroy, it exposes. It doesn't punish, it balances. It doesn't scream for attention, it commands it. That's why Stoic silence isn't a technique, it's a philosophy. A way of moving through a loud world without letting the noise decide who you are. They'll keep wondering why you stopped explaining. They'll replay the moments, search for signs, invent reasons. They'll never understand that your silence was never about them. It was about you. It was your declaration of independence, your refusal to keep negotiating your peace. And while they analyze your absence, you'll be rebuilding your life, quietly, deliberately, powerfully. That's what real transformation looks like. Not in grand speeches or dramatic closure, but in calm detachment. In the ability to walk away without hate, to stay silent without guilt, to choose dignity over reaction. That's where Stoicism becomes real, not as a quote, but as a lived truth. The world doesn't know how to process that kind of peace. It mistakes it for indifference, labels it cold. But you know better, you've felt what it truly is, clarity. The kind that comes after the noise fades. The kind that feels like finally exhaling after years of holding your breath. And maybe they'll come back. Maybe they'll send messages, test your boundaries again. But this time, the silence won't feel heavy. It will feel like freedom. You won't need to prove, to chase, to explain. Because once silence becomes your home, no chaos can touch you. That's the power you've earned, the power of restraint, of calm, of psychological control, the power of not reacting in a world built on reaction. It's not about winning, it's about mastering yourself. And once you do, no one can ever take that from you again. So when this video ends, let the quiet linger. Don't rush back into the noise. Let your stillness speak for you. Because those who truly hold power rarely need to prove it. If this message resonates with you, don't just leave it here. Carry it into your next decision, your next silence, your next test. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that peace is a decision, not a coincidence. Subscribe, turn on the notifications, and keep this energy close. Every week we explore how Stoic silence turns pain into perspective and how you can use it to build unshakable control. And if you believe in what this channel stands for, strength through calm, wisdom through restraint, consider leaving a super thanks below. Not as a favor, but as a sign of alignment. Every time you support, you're not funding a creator. You're fueling a message the world desperately needs. That stillness is not weakness, it's power. So go back into your life carrying this truth quietly. You don't need to explain. You don't need to defend. You don't need to chase. Your silence says everything. Because when you stop explaining yourself, the universe begins to explain everything else. And that's when silence finally begins to punish.